Hi friends, welcome back to Hebraic Creations. Last time I mentioned that we probably should take a look at the dietary laws, especially in light of the coronavirus, and you'll see why in a few minutes. As I've said before, because of modern day distaste for the Old Testament and the law of Moses, there's a huge disconnect between what Yehovah's food parameters are and what we eat today. Let's look at a few of the many misunderstood New Testament Bible passages that have led us astray. First is the account of Peter's vision in Acts chapter 10, verse 11 through 16. This is where Peter has a vision of every imaginable unclean critter and is told to eat, but he balks at that command, saying he's never eaten anything unclean. Some claim this is proof that Yehovah was now permitting us to eat anything we wanted, because he was telling Peter to stop following the outdated dietary laws. But in verse 19 through 20, Peter gets the interpretation of this odd vision. Behold, 3 men are looking for you. Arise and go down, go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. Peter saw the vision 3 times, and 3 men show up at his door. Then he further expounds on this interpretation in verse 28. Peter said to Cornelius' household, "You know that it is unlawful for a Jew to keep company with and visit someone of another nation. But Yehovah has shown me that I should not call any man unclean or defiled." There are several things to note here. First, Peter concluded this vision was not about diet change, but rather about a change in attitude towards Gentiles. Second, if there was a case being built for tossing out the Torah used in these passages, it should be over the fact that Gentiles were taboo and now they're not. The better law-bashing argument would have been if one Old Testament law about fellowship with Gentiles is now null and void, then we can surmise that all the law, including the dietary ones, are now null and void. Third, however, even though it seems like Peter is implying that Yehovah has revised the law, the total opposite is true. He's actually upholding the Torah, because nowhere in the Torah is it forbidden for Jews and Gentiles to fellowship together. That restriction is another example of fabricated rabbinic rules. It's an example of more lawlessness. Do you see how badly some have missed the mark with this biblical account? You may want to check out the video by 119 Ministries as well. It's entitled, "Can We Eat All Things?" 1 Timothy chapter 4. Let's look at our second example. Matthew chapter 15 verses 10 through 11. Yeshua called the multitude and said to them, "Hear and understand. It is not that which goes into the mouth that defiles a man, but that which comes out of the mouth, that defiles a man." Some believers have used this passage out of context to defend careless and unwise food choices. However, Yeshua is only defending the disciples' refusal to wash their hands before eating bread. He's not saying unclean animals source foods were now considered clean. Just like in the verses in Acts, Yeshua is not suggesting the Torah is null and void by minimizing hand washing. That's because nowhere does the Torah require hand washing before eating. This is another man-made rule by the hypocritical Pharisees. In these verses, Yeshua is basically saying that the oral law coming out of the mouth of men is what is defiling them, which is adding to and taking away from the law of Moses. That's the real problem here. So these two examples, we see Yeshua is upholding the Torah, which means the dietary laws are valid and they're important to him, and we should respect them as well. Because the church has botched the interpretation of these and other food passages, many followers of Yeshua think it's okay to eat pork and shellfish and even manufactured frankenfoods with their GMOs, additives, colors, preservatives, and chemicals. Much of this stuff has nothing in common with what Yehovah originally called food. We have bought the lie that saying a prayer over whatever lands on our plate and blessing it to the nourishment of our bodies covers a multitude of sins. This is false doctrine, and it's the result. There are the same rates of disease inside the church as is what we find outside of the church. The Father promises to protect us from sickness and disease if we obey the Torah. If we're sick and diseased, we must be doing something wrong. Yes, by his stripes we are healed, but those stripes came from defending the true law. The most disputed food item in the New Testament was meat because of concern over whether or not it was, number one, properly slaughtered, number two, the blood adequately drained out, number three, whether or not it was the result of pagan temple sacrifices. Now we only concern ourselves over whether or not meat is contaminated by growth hormones, antibiotics, toxic feed, and filthy meat processing practices because we've forgotten what it means to eat clean meat. Here are the guidelines out of Leviticus 11, chapter 11, and Deuteronomy chapter 14. First, land animals must have split hooves and chew the cud, which would include cattle, sheep, goats, deer, and bison. It would exclude things like camels and rodents and pigs. Second, water creatures must have fins and scales. That would include things like tuna, carp, and salmon, but exclude lobster, oysters, and clams, and things like that. Third, birds must not be scavengers. That would include chicken, geese, duck, and turkey, but exclude eagles, vultures, owls, and bats. Fourth, insects must be four-footed and leap. That would include locusts, crickets, and grasshoppers, but exclude things like spiders and caterpillars, worms, and grubs. The fifth category is eggs and dairy. Those need to come from clean animals. Yehovah has good reasons for limiting our meat choices. Medical studies and scientific research has proven the consumption of unclean animals like shellfish and pork exposes us to toxins and parasites, which weakens our immune system, which I believe makes people vulnerable to the diseases of Egypt. This is my personal conclusion, so you should test that for yourself. Last time I mentioned the coronavirus in the Deuteronomy chapters 7 and chapter 28 passages. Torah obedience brings blessings and protection, but disobedience brings curses and the plagues, sicknesses, and diseases of Egypt. My research leads me to believe that there are two human appetites at the root of this present plague. First, hunger for unclean meat sources, and second, hunger for unclean mating habits. Both are forbidden by the Torah. First, unclean meat sources. Some people suspect the corona may have originated in an Asian market that sold every imaginable kind of unclean animal food, such as snakes and bats and rats. Second, unclean mating habits. These are unsanctioned human contacts that's spoken of in Leviticus chapter 18, verse 22, and forbidden relations with animals, which is found in Leviticus chapter 18, verse 23, and chapter 20, verse 15. Both humans and animals in these situations were put to death. What was taboo then is now celebrated by online forums. These perversions and their related plagues are not new if you consider Sodom and Gomorrah. This perverse mistreatment of animals is thankfully illegal in most Bible-believing cultures, but with global economies, infectious diseases are more easily propagated, as the coronavirus has demonstrated to us. And again, the best defense we have is Torah observance, obedient children with our faith in and hope in Yeshua HaMashiach. I've had friends over the years who would declare and decree healing scriptures all the way to their premature graves. Even Yeshua wouldn't tempt Yehovah by jumping off the temple and defying the law of gravity. Let's not be presumptuous. There are natural consequences to rebellion. The law of Moses was given to protect us. The law is a blessing. If you don't believe me, just read all 176 verses in Psalm 119 and you will be convinced. Next time we'll begin pulling back the veil on Paul's epistles. Was he a friend or foe of the Torah? You might be surprised. So stay tuned. Shalom.